The lawyer slid a thick folder across the polished conference table. Daniel Whitmore, he announced, cash assets, investment accounts, and the Lake Ashton property. Applause broke out around the room. Daniel leaned back with a satisfied grin as relatives congratulated him. One after another, my cousins received checks worth millions, luxury homes, and stock portfolios. Every name was followed by smiles, tears, and hugs. Then the lawyer looked at me. Cynthia Whitmore. The room fell quiet. Instead of another folder, he reached into a small envelope and placed a single white business card in front of me. I stared at it, waiting for the real documents. There weren't any. Daniel laughed first. Well, I guess Grandpa finally found you a job. He looked around the room. Probably the number 4 an unemployment office. The table erupted with laughter. Someone actually clapped. I felt every pair of eyes settle on me, as if Grandpa's final message had been that I simply wasn't worth remembering. The lawyer didn't laugh. He lowered his voice until only I could hear. Miss Whitmore, your grandfather left one instruction. I looked up. Call that number, he said quietly. Alone. Welcome to Revenge Story Official, where the quiet ones always have a plan and justice never arrives late. If you believe silence is the most powerful weapon, you are in the right place. Let's get into it. I slipped the card into my purse without saying another word. No one tried to stop me. Why would they? As far as everyone in that room was concerned, inheritance had already been decided. Daniel had become the family's golden heir. My cousins were suddenly millionaires. And I had walked away with something that could fit in my pocket. Behind me, glasses clinked as someone suggested a celebration dinner. Daniel's voice carried through the hallway. I told you Grandpa knew who deserved the real legacy. That wasn't entirely true. For years everyone believed I had distanced myself from Grandpa because I never joined the family company. Daniel had made sure that story spread at every holiday gathering. According to him, I didn't care about family tradition. I lacked ambition. I wasn't capable of handling responsibility. Nobody mentioned that I visited Grandpa almost every week after his health declined. Nobody mentioned the afternoons we spent talking about books instead of business reports. Nobody mentioned that he never once asked me about profits. Those moments had always been private. I reached my car before the sting of humiliation could show on my face. The business card was almost absurdly plain. No company logo, number, address, just a name I didn't recognize and a phone number. I turned it over. Blank. For a full minute I debated throwing it into the passenger seat and driving home. Instead, I took a slow breath and dialed. The phone rang only once. A calm, confident voice answered immediately. We've been expecting your call. I froze. I'm sorry, who is this? There was a brief pause, then the voice spoke again. Please come to your grandfather's private office before anyone else gets there. The address led me to a quiet brick building on the edge of the financial district, a place I had driven past dozens of times without noticing. There was no company sign outside, only a brass plaque with Grandpa's initials. When I stepped inside, a receptionist looked up as though she had been expecting me. Miss Whitmore. I nodded. He single quotes S waiting for you. She led me down a hallway lined with framed photographs of Grandpa spanning decades. At the end of the hall, an elderly man rose from behind a large oak desk. My name is Harold Mercer, he said, extending his hand. I served as your grandfather's trustee for 32 years. I blinked. I've never heard of you. That was intentional. Harold motioned toward several shelves filled with carefully organized journals and binders. Your grandfather believed actions revealed character far better than words. He opened one leather-bound journal. Inside were dated notes written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. Cynthia visited today, never asked about money, stayed 3 hours simply to keep me company. Harold turned another page. Daniel called. Conversation lasted for minutes, asked whether succession documents were finalized. Then another. Cynthia repaired the old radio herself because she knew I liked listening to it. Each page painted a picture I never knew Grandpa had been recording. You documented all of this? I asked quietly. Your grandfather did, Harold replied. I merely safeguarded it. My throat tightened. Then why didn't he tell anyone? Because several legal conditions had to be met before I could explain anything. He closed the journal. For now, you must trust the process. Before I left, Harold handed me a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Grandpa's handwriting. Your grandfather was very specific, he said. Do not open this until after tomorrow's family meeting. As I walked toward the exit, I noticed Reinforced doors requiring electronic access security. Cameras covering every hallway, file rooms protected behind heavy locks. Whatever Grandpa had hidden here, it was far bigger than a sentimental keepsake. If the inheritance had already been settled, why had he built an entirely separate process in secret? The following morning, the atmosphere at family headquarters couldn't have been more different. Champagne glasses circulated through the executive boardroom. Senior managers, board members, and relatives gathered around Daniel as though the transition of power had already happened. Daniel stood at the head of the table wearing Grandpa's favorite navy suit. "Thank you, everyone," he said with an easy smile. "Grandpa built an incredible legacy. I'll make sure our family continues leading this company for generations." Polite applause filled the room. Then his eyes found me. "Well," he added with a smirk, "I'm glad everyone who actually inherited something important could be here. My sister received a business card. I suppose Grandpa believed networking was more valuable than ownership." Several executives exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to laugh. I remained silent before Daniel could continue. The conference room doors opened. Every conversation stopped. Harold Mercer entered, accompanied by two attorneys carrying locked document cases. His calm expression contrasted sharply with the confusion spreading across the room. "More Whitmore," Harold said, "before any executive authority is transferred, I must request that all succession proceedings be suspended." Daniel frowned. "Suspended," he repeated. "Probate has concluded. For the personal estate," one attorney replied evenly. "Not for every asset your grandfather controlled." The room fell completely silent. Harold placed several certified documents on the conference table. These records established that substantial corporate holdings were intentionally excluded from the public probate process. Executives immediately leaned forward. Board members began whispering. One of my cousins looked from Daniel to Harold in disbelief. "You're saying," she asked slowly, "Grandpa owned more than what was listed in the will?" "I am saying," Harold answered carefully, "that the public will was never intended to transfer every interest your grandfather possessed." Daniel's confidence cracked for the first time. His eyes snapped toward me. "This is her doing," he said sharply. "She manipulated him behind everyone's backs." The accusation echoed across the room. Before I could respond, Harold spoke. "Your grandfather anticipated that exact allegation years ago." Daniel took a step forward. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Harold replied, "that my client left instructions addressing today's events long before his passing. I will say nothing further until the required review is complete." The meeting dissolved into anxious conversations as executives postponed every leadership vote. Outside the boardroom, I finally opened Grandpa's sealed envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Trust no one until they show you the final ledger." Before I could ask Harold what it meant, his phone rang. He listened for only a few seconds before his expression hardened. He turned to the attorneys. "Contact every financial institution immediately," he ordered. "Freeze all company ownership records until further notice." By the end of the afternoon, the ripple effects had reached every corner of Grandpa's business empire. Banks placed temporary holds on ownership transfers. The board postponed all executive appointments. Attorneys occupied conference rooms reviewing decades of corporate filings. The celebration that had filled headquarters that morning had vanished. Daniel paced outside the legal department, stopping anyone who might have information. "This is ridiculous," he snapped at one attorney. "I inherited the company." "You inherited what the will transferred," she replied evenly. "We are determining whether that's the full picture." For the first time, Daniel had no answer. Harold escorted me to a secure records facility several floors below the main offices. To security doors and a biometric scanner separated the archive from the rest of the building. Inside, rows of climate-controlled cabinets stretched across the room. Harold unlocked one drawer and carefully removed a thick binder. "These filings were never part of probate," he said. He opened the first page. Corporate ownership charts spread across the table. Over nearly 20 years, Grandpa had quietly transferred voting control into a privately held parent company. Every major business the family believed they owned ultimately traced back to that single holding company. Suddenly everything fit together: the business card, Harold's hidden office, Grandpa's journals, the confidential meetings, even the strange instruction about the final ledger. None of it had been random. It had all been preparing for this moment. Harold slid one last sealed document toward me. "This cannot be opened," he said, "until you authorize it." Before I could respond, an alarm sounded from the hallway. One of the attorneys rushed in. "We have a problem." Security footage appeared on a nearby monitor. Daniel was confronting a records employee outside another restricted file room. "I don't care what the instructions are," Daniel demanded. "Open the file." "I can't," the employee replied nervously. "Only the trustee has authorization." Daniel stepped closer. "No one has to know." The employee backed away and immediately activated a security alert. Within minutes, building security escorted Daniel away from the restricted area while investigators preserved the surveillance footage. The attempted access triggered a broader review. Attorneys soon uncovered evidence that someone had also tried to gain unauthorized access to estate records shortly before Grandpa's death. The investigation was no longer limited to inheritance questions. Daniel stood silently in the hallway as legal staff carried additional evidence into the review room. The certainty that had defined him since the will reading was gone. That evening, every key family member, attorney, and board representative gathered inside the largest conference room. The atmosphere was tense enough that no one spoke above a whisper. Harold entered carrying a single sealed file. He placed it carefully in the center of the table. "Everything changes," he said quietly, "after what's inside is read." Harold broke the seal with deliberate care. No one moved. The only sound in the room was the turning of paper as he unfolded the final document. "This," he began, "is your grandfather's private succession directive." Daniel leaned forward. "So let's get this over with." Harold ignored him and continued. "Years before his passing, Mer Whitmore separated his personal estate from the ownership structure of his business empire. He believed that distributing wealth and transferring leadership were two very different decisions. Several board members exchanged stunned looks. Harold pointed to the ownership chart projected onto the screen. The cash, real estate, and investment accounts distributed through the public will were genuine inheritances. However, they represented only Mer Whitmore's personal assets. He turned another page. The controlling interests in every major company were transferred over many years into this privately held parent company. A murmur spread through the room. "So none of us actually controlled the businesses," one executive whispered. Harold answered without hesitation, "The holding company does." He looked directly at me. "And your grandfather named Cynthia Whitmore as its sole controlling successor." The room fell silent. Daniel shot to his feet. "That makes no sense." Harold calmly opened another binder. "It does when you read Mr. Whitmore's journals." He began reading selected entries. Daniel asked again whether I had finalized succession papers. He never asked how I was feeling. Another page. "Cynthia spent the afternoon helping me organize old family photographs. She refused reimbursement. NOTHER. Leadership belongs to the person who values people before power." I lowered my eyes as Harold closed the journal. "I didn't know he wrote any of that," I said quietly. "He never intended you to," Harold replied. "He wanted years of consistent actions to make the decision, not a single conversation." One of the investigators stood. "We've also completed our preliminary review," he said, placing several reports before the board. "Security footage confirms Daniel Whitmore attempted unauthorized access to restricted corporate records. Additional evidence shows earlier attempts to gain access to confidential estate documents before Mr. Whitmore's death." Daniel's face went pale. "I never altered the will." "No," the investigator said, "we found no evidence of that, but your conduct violated company governance policies and compromised the integrity of the succession process." The chairman of the board slowly stood. "Effective immediately, Daniel Whitmore is removed from all executive authority pending final administrative review." No one objected. The executives who had applauded Daniel only hours earlier remained silent. Several family members looked at me with expressions completely different from the laughter they had shown at the will reading. My cousin quietly admitted, "We thought Grandpa had forgotten you." "So did I," answered. Harold handed me one final envelope. "This is his last personal letter." I unfolded it carefully. "Cynthia, if you're reading this, then the test worked. Wealth can be inherited. Character cannot. You never visited me because you expected a reward. You came because you believed I shouldn't be alone. Protect the people who helped build this company and never confuse authority with entitlement." I folded the letter slowly. Looking around the room, I took a breath. "I won't run this company the way favoritism has run this family." Everyone listened. "If you work Here you'll keep your position by earning it. That applies to relatives as much as anyone else. No one argued the decision wasn't emotional, it was final. Over the following months, the transition stabilized the company. Employees who had feared uncertainty returned their focus to work. The board restored confidence among investors, and the businesses continued operating without interruption. Daniel lost his executive office, his influence, and the reputation he had spent years building. The authority he had assumed was already his disappeared with a single set of documents. One quiet afternoon, I visited Grandpa's grave. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone and took the worn business card from my wallet. It looked exactly the same as it had on the day everyone laughed. Simple, ordinary, easy to dismiss. I smiled, slipped it back into my wallet, and thanked Grandpa for believing in me before I believed in myself. The one thing everyone laughed at became the key to everything they thought they already owned. You are watching this right now. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. That is my story, and I will see you on Revenge Story Official, where silence is power and the truth always finds its moment.